Boker Tov, Shalom Aleichem, everyone. Welcome back to the Aliyah Day. Glad that you're with me. I am glad to be with you. And welcome aboard. So glad that you're part of the program today. Yesterday, we talked a lot about the idea of bitachon and bitachon amuna. And today, in our discussion of Dinah, we get to explore this topic yet again, because the story of Dinah is in her abduction and her subsequent violation is really a tragic story, of course. Okay. And I'm sure Dinah, like most of us, when we go through tragic things, in our story today, as an example, Dinah, as we're going to find out, that Dinah goes out to Shechem and she gets abducted by the son of the king, the prince, and he violates her. As a result of that violation, she becomes pregnant, which, I'm sure for most women, I would have to imagine that that's probably one of the most horrific things that could happen, and that's terrible, right? She's probably thinking to herself, I was just minding my own business and this happened to me. We're gonna, as we dive into the story, we'll be elaborate on that thought process a little bit more. But we're going to find out that this event that happened to her, as terrible as it is, actually resulted in a very important outcome. And so why does Hashem do what he does? And what's the reason that he orchestrates things the way that he orchestrates them? I don't know. And most of us don't. We don't know why things turn out the way they do, or why Hashem has to move the proverbial chess pieces the way in which he does. And quite frankly, who are we to question the Creator and his methodology? And the answer is, of course, we're nobody. We have no say. We have no reason to do anything. But we're going to dive into this story. It's a really interesting story. Pardon me. It's one of my favorite stories, only because, again, of the lesson it teaches us. But before we get too further along, and by the way, I'm going to begin by reading an insight that has to do with yesterday's Aliyah, that's going to kind of lead into this. But I told you I was going to do that yesterday, so I want to make sure and hold true to my promises. But before we do that, let's say good morning and a boker tov to everyone. Good morning, Sergio. Boker tov to you. Good morning to Yonina, who's formerly from Georgia. Glad to see you this morning. Guten Morgen to you, Greg, and Guten Tag to Ahava. Bonjour to Jean. Buongiorno to you and Chris and Crystal. Good morning to Donna. And hello there to Shoshana Brenner. You and Zake and Yagal. Y'all are at the Fort Worth Stockyards. Well, hope y'all have a good time. Watch out for the mechanical bull. A little rough on the back. Good morning, Yitzhak. Good morning to you, Ariella. Good morning to Denise. Guten Morgen to you, Kim. Buenos dias, Kayla, you and Rob and the children. Let's see. Boker tov to you, Miriam. And bonjour, Gianna. Bonjour, bonjour. There's the rabbit scene, the little butterfly. Good morning to you, Brenda Jones. And Heather Wilson. Hope you and Zachary are doing fantastic. Good morning to Jubilee and Leah Smith. Well, Boker tov and welcome back, Leah. Hope you and Shmuel are doing great. And I hope you all had a blessed time, a fantastic time there in Somalia. I mean Minnesota. Good morning, Meatball. Good morning to Micaiah. Good morning to I already said good morning, Shoshana Brenner. Good morning, Anna Smith. Boker tov to you. Sarah Merritt, there you are. Good morning, Sarah. Hope you and Shane are doing fantastic. Good morning, Nellie Grace and Christone. Yes, Boker tov to you, Christone. Good morning, Cara and Sonia. And Gingrich, Boker Tov, good to see you this morning. Who else do we have? Anybody else? Anthony, Boker Tov to you. Good morning. Glad you are with us and part of the program today. All right, the story of Dinah. Let's dive into this as we look at the parting of ways of Esau and Jacob yesterday. I just want to read a few insights here from Rabbi Monk's commentary because they're so good. Kind of helps us to see, where people have gone wrong, where we have gone wrong, and how to not make that kind of mistake, right? This is, of course, these insights are a largely allegory. But it says here, and this has to do with verse 14. Esau is trying to tell Jacob, by the way, hey, come along with me. And Jacob says, no, not going to do that. And then Esau's like, well, let me assign some of my people who are with me to go with you. And Jacob says, no, hard pass on that. Jacob says, let my Lord go ahead of his servant. I will make my way at my slow pace according to the gate of the drove before me and the gate of the children until I come to my Lord at Seir. Most men understand this passage because, we're married and we have wives. So it's like, just go on without us. We're going to be a minute. She's doing her hair. Well, Jacob has 4 wives. So that's go on. We're going to proceed at a slow gait here. Anyway, 4 wives and a daughter. Oh yeah. So it says here, until I come to my Lord. It says he never did go there. Rashi tells us he wanted to be far apart from his brother. So when will he come? Okay. It says, in the days of the Messiah, as it is written in Obadiah 1:21. Now remember, Obadiah the prophet is a convert to Judaism. Some of you know that already, but it is important to note that Obadiah the prophet is a convert to Judaism. So if you ever run into anybody and they suggest that it's impossible to convert to Judaism, then you should tell them that they need to rip Obadiah out of their Bible because obviously they have just indicated that he is a false prophet because he was a son of Esau who converted to Judaism. But it's saying here that Rashi's asking the question, when will Jacob go and unite with Esau? And the answer is given to us that will occur in the days of the Moshiach. Remember that Esau is Christianity. Jacob, of course, is Judaism. So when will Christianity unite with Judaism? The answer is when the Moshiach comes. But it will not be, as some think, that all the Jews will become Christians. That's not what's going to happen. Obadiah the prophet already prophesied about this and said, indeed, this is the last time we see the two brothers together. Henceforth, they go their separate ways and will see each other again only at their father's burial. But at this meeting, blood will be shed. They will be together again only in Messianic times. Jacob temporarily forgoes the benefit of the paternal blessing. He gives way to his brother, who will dominate him until Jacob's time comes. This temporary renunciation has already been pointed out in the commentary above. So it goes on to say, let me assign to you some of the people who are with me. Excuse me, sorry, an itchy nose. Jacob declined this offer, but Esau insisted, and so it turned out later in history. Converts from the Edomites, descendants of Esau, came to the ranks of the Jewish people, as was the case with the prophet Obadiah, among others. Our verse discreetly alludes to this. The numeric value of the words Aziga na imecha 290 equals that of the words Elu Gerim. These are the proselytes. So here the Torah is giving us an illusion in the Gematria that indeed you, Esau, you will assign men who are with you to be with Jacob. And the illusion here is those are converts. You're not going to assign them now, but they will be assigned in the future time to come. I've told you before that the Torah makes clear, okay? The Torah makes abundantly clear. The Tanakh, let me put it that way. Excuse me. Let me say the Tanakh. The Tanakh makes abundantly clear that in the end days, the entire world will be living a Jewish life. That's a fact. Now some have say, well, does that mean that everybody will actually be practicing Judaism? Or, well, let me just put it this way. The Tanakh makes it clear that everybody will be keeping the Torah. The Tanakh makes it clear that everybody will be keeping the festivals. Everybody will be eating kosher. In fact, everybody will have kosher dishes. Like Noahides don't have kosher dishes. Noahides don't eat kosher. Noahides don't keep the festivals. In fact, this is in my book on the Noahide deception, but they're not allowed to keep the festivals. Okay, but I write all about that in the book. So what does that mean? It means that everybody's keeping the Torah. Well, the point being is you can't keep the Torah and not be Jewish. So the whole world is going to join Jacob. That is the end result of reality. And frankly, for me, I talk sometimes about what caused me to change courses spiritually. What caused me to go from the religious life I was in to now doing this, right? And one of the answers to that is this concept of inevitability. As I was studying the Tanakh and looking at these passages, it became crystal clear to me that Torah is in my future one way or the other. I don't want to give the impression that I was resistant to it necessarily, but like many of you, I had the same questions. I had the same hangups. I had the same concerns. I had the same fears. Because remember, a lot of people live in a religious fear. It's really not because of them. It's because of what's been said to them. If you do that, you're going to lose your salvation. If you try that, oh my gosh, you better not question that, or you're going to go right to Gehenna. Listen, those same kind of fears were on me too, because it's all the same deal. But at the same time, as I looked at that, I said, well, look, what if I don't keep the festivals now? I'm going to be keeping them in the Messianic future. If I'm not even eating kosher now, I will be eating kosher in the Messianic future. If I'm not wearing tzitzit now, I will be wearing tzitzit in the Messianic future. So the point I'm trying to make is, it became obvious to me that resistance is futile. Now, I didn't come over to this way of life, so to speak, because of that as my ultimate thing, but I'm just saying that one of the ideas that came to my mind is like, why am I not doing this? If this is the way it's going to be in the Messianic future, and the Tanakh makes that clear, it's not up for debate. It's not up for debate. We're not going to have Christmas in the Messianic future. We're not going to have Kwanzaa in the Messianic future. We're not going to have, I'm not familiar with the names of other pagan celebrations, but whatever. What's the one? Oh, here's a pagan celebration. Ramadan. Okay, there's a pagan celebration. We're not going to have Ramadan in the Messianic future, okay? Or anything else, or St. Patrick's Day, or whatever, okay? But we will have Sukkot. We'll have Pesach. We'll have Rosh Hashanah. We'll have Shabbat. Like, all of that is crystal clear, right? So if this is what the Messianic future looks like, then why am I resisting it? That was part of my mindset. I just want to throw that out there to you. So another insight here is that so Esau started back that day on his way. Now this is the insight I really want to read before we get to Dinah here. So Esau started out towards Seir. So he leaves Jacob's presence. It says, for Esau, the destination, the goal to aim for is Seir. For Jacob, it's Sukkot. This kind of is what I was just talking about. These two names reveal the divergence between Christian thought, represented by Esau, and Jewish thought, represented by Jacob. Now, what I'm reading to you, just as a reminder, this comes from Rabbi Monk's commentary. Rabbi Monk, of course, being an Orthodox rabbi, I just want to point that out, that these are his words, not mine. Okay? The question is asked, where in the Bible does it make that clear? Zechariah 14, and Zechariah 8, and Isaiah 66, and Isaiah 2:3, just 4 references. And Micah, Micah 6. Oh, also in Malachi, the 4th chapter of Malachi, it says not to forget the laws of Moses in the end days. So those are just 6 references off the top of my head. I'd have to go back, and I got a bunch more, but that's just the top 6. So it says here, these two names reveal the divergence between Christian thought, represented by Esau, and Jewish thought, represented by Jacob. The former sees the highest expression of the religious ideal in the notion of Seir. Seir, Hamishtalech, meaning the scapegoat. In direct connection with Esau is called the Ish She'ir. This is emphasized by the Ramban. This idea includes the principle of redemption and absolution, appearing as acts of grace which emanate from divine love. But Jewish thought goes further. Judaism does not consider the absolution obtained through the scapegoat on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, to be a final climax. It continues after Yom Kippur to journey to Sukkot. This festival marks the Zeman Simchatenu, the time of our rejoicing. It springs forth from the state of moral purity acquired during the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. But it has us transcend this to a higher level of divine service, that of Simchat Shel Mitzvah, the joy of performing religious duties. Although the other religions have been able to imitate the biblical festivals, with the notable exception of Sukkot, they still could not conceive of the supreme form of divine service in an atmosphere of sacred joy, as is exalted in this festival. Thus, the two paths separate after the final meeting. Esau returns to Seir, but for Jacob, he journeys forth to Sukkot. That's a beautiful insight, talking about the fact that Esau, representing Rome, just wants to stay with the scapegoat. Their highest exaltation is the absolution, just having been forgiven. But that's not the Jewish highest level. The Jewish highest level is to journey to Sukkot, to take that absolution, to take that teshuvah, to take that point of forgiveness and utilize it in the divine service. 2 things it reminds me of really quickly is Rebbe and I were doing our morning devotional, reading some of the Rabbi Twersky commentary, and he mentioned about white garments, and then what that represents, and then what does oil represent with respect to Tanakh and Judaism in general. Made me think of the 10 virgins story from the Gospels, which the story of the virgins is that, there are 5 they're all virgins, right? Which you would presume they're dressed in white and so forth. 5 have oil and 5 don't have oil. Now, traditionally, a lot of people have interpreted that to mean that some have the Holy Spirit and some don't, but that's not what oil represents in Jewish thought. Now, you might think to yourself, well, but to me, oil, well, with all due respect, it doesn't matter what it means to you. It doesn't matter what it means to Frank or Tommy either. What it matters is what did oil represent in Judaism to Jews? So when the Messiah is giving this parable, what's important is what is the euphemism of oil to the listeners 2,000 years ago? With all due respect, it doesn't matter what it means to you and me today, okay? Because the point of the parable is I'm using a euphemism that's going to speak to my audience at that moment. Okay? All right. So at that moment, oil represents good deeds and good character. That's what it means. That's what it represents. And so you have 10 virgins, which means that they're all wearing white garments, right? Euphemistically. So what does white garments mean? Well, it means forgiveness. It means free of sin. That's what being a virgin means spiritually. So here you have 10 virgins, right? In other words, they all have forgiveness. Some had the oil, good deeds and good character, good reputation, and some did not. And the ones that had the good deeds and good reputation made it into the kingdom, and those that did not didn't. This is what's so beautiful about this is it's completely congruent with Matthew chapter 7 when he says, there'll be many who said to me, Lord, Lord, and I'll say, I never knew you. So what's the message? The message is that going to Seir and having the scapegoat is fine and dandy. That makes us a virgin. That's wonderful. But if we don't have the oil, if we don't have the good deeds, then we have problems. Okay? Significant problems. Which brings us to Dinah. Okay? It brings us to Dinah. Now, Dinah is a righteous woman. I want to say, as we talk about her story, which really began with Esau. Remember, she was hidden in a box when they were meeting Esau because, she didn't want to marry Esau and her dad didn't want her to marry Esau. But remember that Dinah was the daughter of Leah, as it says here in the Kel Tumash, who had been born to Jacob. Dinah was Leah's daughter not only in the biological sense, but also in the moral sense. She inherited her mother's willingness to venture out of the safety of her tent for holy and righteous purposes. Okay? Dinah is a good girl. She's a good, godly girl. She is indeed the daughter of her mother. So everything that happens to her is really not her fault. As we're about to find out, Dinah's whole point in venturing out, which was really what put her in danger. The whole point of that, however, was for a holy and righteous purpose, which we're going to now explain. So it says, confident in her ability to positively influence others, even though she was no more than a girl, a young girl at the time. Here it says 10, but she was probably likely older than that. She went out to observe the girls of that region in order to convince them to adopt the righteous ways of her family. So, in other words, Dinah goes out to witness to the girls of Shechem. That was the point, okay? And now this brings us to another thought. What's going to happen to her? She is going to have this mindset, or I'm not going to say she absolutely has the mindset because this is my opinion, okay? I don't want to say that this is definitely what she was thinking. But you can imagine that when she goes out to witness these ladies, these young ladies, to try to influence them to become Jews, because remember, Jews up until the Middle Ages, before things changed, we were constantly trying to reach people. So she goes out and tries to reach them for the Torah, for the sake of heaven, and she ends up being violated, and tragedy happens. Now you can imagine her mindset might have been, hey, wait a minute. This isn't fair. I was trying to do the right thing. I was trying to do the work of God. I was trying to be true to my calling, true to my mission. And look what happened. She could have been bitter. She could have had questions. Has that ever happened to you or I? Have you ever done something that was the right thing to do, and then it's seemingly like you got punished for it? I would venture to say that probably everybody who's watching this program, all 71 of you, could probably raise your hand and say, yep, that's happened to me, or at least it seemed like that was the case. Well, it says here, but Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, who was the chief of the region, saw her, took her, raped her, and abused her carnally in other ways as well. Despite himself, he became attached to Jacob's daughter Dinah. He loved the girl and spoke to the girl in a way he hoped would win over her heart, saying, look how many ornate coins your father expended just to purchase a small parcel of land. If you marry me, the whole city and its environs will effortlessly and automatically become yours. So here he is trying to, swoo her with finances after he has abused her against her will, of course. So it says, Shechem spoke to his father Hamor as follows: get me this young girl as a wife. Now, I just want to point out, for those of you who may not have seen it, I did a special teaching on the errors of Acts, and it had to do with Acts chapter 7 and the fictitious Stephen, who never existed, giving his long, wordy speech to the Sanhedrin, which never happened. And in that speech, he says that Abraham bought the field, the burial place for Sarah. He bought it in Shechem from Hamor. So the whoever wrote Acts got that all mixed up. That's a big error, right? And so Scripture can't have error. So there you go. But that's the writer of Acts was obviously not very familiar with the Scriptures, and therefore they got some stories mixed up. Like as an example, David was on the ark with Bathsheba. No, it's not in the book of Acts, but I'm just kidding. But that's how you conflate some things here. But anyway, so Hamor was the father of Shechem at Shechem. And no, Abraham did not buy anything from Hamor because obviously, didn't happen. So here it is. Hamor, and Shechem told his father Hamor, give me this young girl as a wife. Now Jacob heard, now this is interesting, right? Just as a side note, Jacob goes and takes this woman and violates her. Then he goes to Hamor, who has no power. Hamor has no authority to give her to him. So everything's all messed up here. First of all, why don't you ask ahead of time instead of taking, but whatever. So it says, now Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dinah. His sons were in the field with his livestock. So Jacob held his peace until they came. Okay. Shmuel says, I would say that it would be hard to win a girl after abusing her. I think that would be a correct thing to say. I think most women would be like, yeah, no, thank you. I'm sure Dinah felt the same way. So it says, meanwhile, Shechem's father Hamor went out to Jacob to speak with him. Jacob's sons returned from the field. When they heard what Shechem had done to Dinah, the men, her brothers, became aggrieved and were deeply incensed, for Shechem had committed an outrage to their father Israel by raping their sister, Jacob's daughter. Such a thing was considered socially and legally taboo ever since humanity had collectively forsworn illicit carnal relationships in the wake of the flood. In other words, this was considered universally wrong, and made such acts a capital offense. Thus, Shechem's act made him liable to the death penalty. The other residents of the city were implicit in his offense as well for not having voiced their protest. Now Hamor spoke with them, saying, my son Shechem deeply desires your daughter. I implore you, give her to him in marriage, and intermarry with us. Give us your daughters, and take our daughters for yourself. These marriages between our two people will take place at your sole discretion. You may decide to which of our men you will give your daughters, as well as which of our daughters you will take for your men. You will live among us, and the land will be open before you, and you may settle in it, trade in it, acquire holdings in it. Then Shechem said to her father and brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you tell me to give as a dowry, I will give. Well, son, this is kind of a day late and a dollar short. Now you're coming to ask us to give you our daughter or our sister to you, and you'll pay us a dowry, but yet you're the one who, abducted her and violated her. And so, this is, if it wasn't so tragic, it'd be comical, right? There was a time in our culture here in the United States. I don't think this is really practiced anymore. Although it may be practiced some, but I don't think it's common. Let me put it that way, where the young man has to come and ask the father for permission, to marry, to marry the daughter, before he even asks to marry her, And maybe if the father's not alive, then he has to come and talk to the brother, if there's a brother, or perhaps an uncle, whatever, some male, whoever the male figure is in her life. And that practice, I think, is not very common anymore. But I think it should be revived, in my opinion, because I think that it's healthy. It always seems to put a healthy amount of fear and trepidation in the mind and heart of the young man. And it's also a time for the father to have that talk, with the young man. And I think it's just good. I think it's good. And I will say, from a adult male point of view, for any young men that might be listening out there, it does make you, in the eyes of the father, a lot more highly respected. So if there happens to be any young men out there, and you're, one of these days you hope to find a young lady that you're going to want to propose to, I would suggest, even if it's not customary, even if, the father hasn't required it or whatever, that you just should make that a thing that you do, because it's good for you. There's fear and trepidation there, because, he's an authority figure and he might kill you. And it's good for you in his eyes, because it's going to make him respect you a lot more, and it'll engender you to him and him to you, and it'll just be a good thing. So make note of that and make that a thing that you do. Okay. I think it's good. But Shechem did not do that, because Shechem is a scoundrel and a reprobate, and he deserved everything that happened to him. So it says, go ahead, demand of me exceedingly high figure for the dowry, and you will stipulate in the bridal contract for gifts, and I will give as much as you tell me. Just give me this girl as a wife, or as we say in French, a wife. When Jacob's sons replied to Shechem and his father Hamor, they spoke cunningly, for he had defiled their sister Dinah. They told them, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to an uncircumcised man, for that would be considered a disgrace to us. In fact, when one of our people wishes to insult someone, he calls him uncircumcised, or the son of an uncircumcised father. Hence the reason why David referred to I went blank. Goliath, thank you. Goliath as an uncircumcised Philistine. Here's an example. Speaking of what I was just saying, Leah says, Shmuel asked my dad before asking me. I'm so thankful he did. I think it also enriched Shmuel and my dad's relationship. Absolutely. See, that's a great example of what I was talking about. And I'm sure it did, because it's good for both. from the dad's point of view, I can just say that, you know, it makes you respect the young man and gives you a level of confidence. So it's just good. It's just a good, healthy thing. Let's see here. So we insult someone by saying, call them uncircumcised. This is what David did to Goliath. It says, therefore, we will give our assent only on this condition, that you be like us, and that every male among you become circumcised. We will then intermarry with you as you have proposed, that is, at our sole discretion. We will give you our daughter and take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live together with you and become a single nation. But if you do not heed us and circumcise yourselves, we will take our sister, our father's daughter, and depart. Their terms were acceptable to Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's sons. The young man did not delay in carrying out this thing, since he desired Jacob's daughter, and he was the most respected person in his father's household. Hamor then came with his son Shechem to the gate of the city, where they were all gathered, and they spoke to the men of the city there. Okay. It says, these men are fully at peace with us. Let them live in the land and trade in it, for the land has ample room for them. Supply in our land exceeds demand, so letting them live here and trade in the land will not adversely affect our economy. When Hamor and Shechem had proposed intermarriage between the two peoples to Jacob and his sons, they phrased their proposal to Jacob's family advantage, allowing them to select Hivite women for their daughters and take whatever Hivite girls they wish for wives. In contrast, when they now set the proposal of intermarriage before their compatriots, they altered the wording to their of their compatriots' advantage in order to induce them to consent to be circumcised. They said, we will take their daughters as wives, and we will give our daughters to them, both at our discretion. But only on this condition will the men consent to live with us and come as one nation, that every male among us be circumcised just as they are circumcised. After that, when they will dwell with us, their livestock, their possessions, and all their animals will become ours. Let us just agree to their condition, and they will live among us. So, as we're finding out, they were willing to convert, but not for the sake of heaven. They were converting, well, for Dinah, for other advantages, for other women, and also for livestock. They wanted to possess everything that Jacob and his sons possessed. So all the peoples who had come out to the gate of Hamor's city heeded Hamor and his son Shechem, and all the males who came out to the gate of the city had themselves circumcised. On the third day after their circumcision, when the Hivites were in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, each took up a sword. They acted as Dinah's loyal brothers, risking their lives for her sake, but without first consulting their father. They fell upon the city, confident in their ability to overcome the men, firstly, because of the Hittites' weakness and pain due to circumcision, and secondly, in the merit of their father Jacob, and they killed every male among them. Okay. They also killed Hamor and his son Shechem by the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house, and they left. When they went to rescue Dinah, they found her agonizing in embarrassment over what had happened to her, and afraid that consequently no one would want to marry her. And Simeon therefore promised that he would marry her, and it was only on this condition that she consented to be rescued. Now, he didn't actually marry her, but that's just, trying to make her feel better. So they killed everybody. They plundered everything. I want to come back and read this insight here. One of the things that happens to Dinah, by the way, but I want to say this in case I run out of time. This is a terrible thing that happened, clearly. She is going to become with child. The brothers they're not gonna want to accept the child. To them, it turns out to be a daughter. Well, to them, this daughter um, is a son of a pagan, and so they don't want anything to do with that. They better that she be given up for adoption, and that's what happens. But Jacob, before they send this little girl off for adoption, puts a necklace around her neck, and on the necklace is inscribed in Hebrew, daughter of Jacob, okay, Bat Yaakov. And so she's sent off. Well, the story goes from the ancient sources is that eventually this child, through the adoption, whatever, ends up making its way to Egypt and becomes adopted by Potiphar and grows up in Potiphar's house as the daughter of Potiphar, who gives her the name Asenath. And so the story is that Asenath, because of this necklace, knows that she's really a daughter of Jacob, but she's an outcast of the family. So here comes Joseph, who becomes a slave of Potiphar, who also is a son of Jacob and an outcast of the family. So as Joseph is elevated to the status of king or viceroy anyway, he is paraded through the streets, and of course he's an eligible bachelor. He's driving a Ferrari chariot, and he has all kinds of wealth, and apparently he's good looking too. So there's all kinds of things going for Joseph. So all the women of the city are throwing flowers and different things into the chariot, which probably was disturbing him because it's got some nice leather in there. But in any case, was throwing stuff in there, trying to get his attention, hopefully that they might catch their eye. And what Asenath does is she takes off this necklace and throws it into the chariot. And when he sees the necklace, that she's Bat Yaakov, which of course, really granddaughter of Yaakov in this case, he takes her to be a wife. So what happens after that? Well, Asenath becomes the wife of Joseph, and Asenath subsequently becomes the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh, who end up becoming tribes of Israel. Not just that, but through the work of Asenath and Joseph, they win many souls to faith in Egypt. I'll get to that story when we get eventually to Joseph. And the descendants of those souls, one to Asenath and Joseph, eventually lay the groundwork for the 2.4 million converts to come out of Egypt, known as the mixed multitude, when the Exodus happens. All of this because of Dinah. Now, Dinah had gone out to Shechem to witness to the young women, hopefully to win some of them to HaShem. And as a result of her effort, she went out there to win souls to HaShem, to bring people under the wings of the Shekinah. She had everything in her heart was righteous, and then she goes out there and she gets violated, and she probably thinks that her entire mission was a bust, and she probably thinks that her entire life is worthless. Now, Dinah was sent to this world. Her mission in this matrix was to be the mother of Asenath, so that her daughter would be the one to marry Joseph, you see, because how else was a Jewish girl going to end up in Egypt? I mean, okay, you could say, well, one of the girls of Egypt could have converted. That's true. But that's not what was needed to create tribes, you see. Not just children, but tribes. The point being is that Dinah went out to win a few souls and bring them on the Shekinah, and she felt like the whole plan was a disaster. But unbeknownst to her, she would be really, ultimately responsible for 2.4 million souls coming out of Egypt. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the lesson in Emunah and Bitcoin. When bad things happen to us and we think, why did this happen? Listen, Dinah might have thought, my mission, I'm a daughter of Leah. My mission here is to win souls. And then it looks like it blows up like an Acme bomb in her face, like she's Wile E. Coyote. Unbeknownst to her, she was directly responsible in this matrix for what just happened. And ladies and gentlemen, you and I have to understand that. We're in the matrix. We came here on a mission. The mission is what it is. Maybe it doesn't work out like you thought, but it's exactly what God wanted it to be. Now, we're out of time. I just want to read this last little highlighted part just because it says, her efforts did bear fruit, talking about Dinah. Before they killed the residents of Shechem, Simeon and Levi had them circumcise themselves. Now, although this was partly a ruse to weaken the men of Shechem, it was also meant to have a metaphysical effect. Circumcision is part of the process by which a non-Jew converts to Judaism, and this fact was well known to the inhabitants of Shechem. By agreeing to be circumcised, the males of Shechem were agreeing to be refined to a certain degree. This collective assent to become at least partly Jewish refined their whole society as well, including the girls. So you see, Dinah did have at least a partial effect even in Shechem. Now you might be asking yourself, wait a minute, Rabbi, if they circumcised themselves, then they were Jewish. And how is it okay to murder a bunch of Jews, even for revenge? The answer is they weren't Jewish. They had gone through circumcision, but they had not yet gone through the waters of the mikveh. It's the mikveh that makes you Jewish, not the circumcision. You need the circumcision, yes, but the final step is the mikveh. End of our Aliyah today. Thank you so much for being a part of the program today. I hope it's been insightful and educational. Please be sure to like this video. Subscribe to our channel, by the way, if you've not yet done so. Make a comment, share this with all of your friends, and hopefully this will be life-giving and uplifting to those who hear it. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow as we close out our week. Until then, have a great and amazing day. By the way, if you did not see the Paths of Faith that was put together by Yochanan and Tirza, then we invite you to do that on this channel, and that would be great. Be blessed. See you tomorrow. Until then, have a great and amazing day.